All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to ITProTV. I'm your host, Don Pezet, and in this episode, we're going to be jumping into CompTIA IT Fundamentals, and specifically taking a look at software usage requirements. And here in the studio to join us and walk us through all this process, we've got Mr. Ronnie Wong. Ronnie, thanks for joining us.
Well, Don, thank you again for having me as we continue to take a look here into our CompTIA IT Fundamentals. We are now diving into the world of software and applications specifically, and the idea of actually having all these things run. It's a great thing. We want to get into that. But before we do so, like everything else, there's always some requirement that we have to think about before we can actually use it. So as we get started, we want to make sure that we talk about some of those different requirements as well. So we're going to be using terms like cross-platform and single platform. I know, great terms that we really want to use, but it actually does explain why we have to actually talk about it a little bit more. We also need to get into the realm of licensing as well as costs, and how do we actually make sure that the company or whoever actually has sold us the software or licensed it to us knows that we've actually gotten the right product and the right number of products too. So we'll be using all that in this episode to help us out to understand some of the things we've got to consider. It's not just saying, all right, let's get that software and we're done and ready to go. That can be costly at times, but we have to make sure we understand the right way to do this.
All right, now Ronnie, you mentioned platforms, and platform really just a fancy way of saying operating system. And in our last few episodes, we've talked about some of the different operating systems that are out there. When I want to run an application, that usually means that there's some functionality I wanted that wasn't present in the operating system already, which is pretty common, right? Normally we want specific things that just aren't there. So I'm going to go out and get an application, and I have to make sure that it will work with my platform, with my operating system. So what does that process look like? What all is involved in that?
Don, that's a great question. When we start taking a look at this idea of the different platform and what's actually required in that, is we may have to consider, first of all, of course, that idea of, does that software run with the operating system that I want to? It's hard to actually think about this, but I've had that happen where I said, this is a great product that I'd want to use, and I was running it inside of a Windows environment. And when I switched over to a Mac, I realized something. It wasn't actually available. So if it wasn't available, then I have to either try and find a way to make it work, or I have to go back to the previous operating system. And those are things that I have to consider when I start doing that. So what we have to do is be able to find the software that we want and verify and check whether or not it can actually run in that environment when we start doing it. Okay. So when we start to take a look at it, right, the idea of course, is that we pick a software and then we go and try and see from the information that we get whether or not it is going to be capable to support what we want to. So let's take a look at some of the options that we may encounter as we want to download software that runs on our system. So I've gone ahead and inside of my Windows 10 machine, I've pulled up Microsoft Edge as my browser to help us to run this here. I want to take a look at one piece of software in particular. I went ahead and also, of course, connected to the website itself, which is 7-Zip. Now, 7-Zip, it says a file archiver with high compression ratio, which is good. But as I take a look here and I go, hey, I want to actually download this to run, Don, I'm noticing right here at the very top, it seems to indicate it is for Windows, okay? So it looks like I'm perfectly fine with Windows. But if I am on a Linux version of some sort, or a Linux distro, or the idea of Mac OS, it looks like that this may not work for me. So at the very beginning here, I have to at least consider that this may not work in my favor the way that I want to. But also underneath the links here, you can also see where there's a 32-bit version as well as a 64-bit version. Now, that doesn't really do too much for us today in determining that, because most of the machines that we operate today, and even the operating systems, if they're 64-bit, it will allow you to run the 32-bit version too, but usually 32-bit versions of the operating system won't let you run the 64-bit. So at least here, when we want to download it, if I want to download this for a Windows operating system, I would, of course, pick the version that I want, or one of these two links here, based on what I want here, and mine's a Windows 64-bit. So I'd simply click on this link and download that, and then I could, of course, install it and get it to run. But I do need to consider that for at least that one version if I'm going to do this.
And I know just from my own experience, the 64-bit OSs are the most common today. They weren't always. So how do people know which one they need? Like I know I'm running Windows, How do I know if I'm 32-bit or 64-bit?
Right, Don. So a couple of different ways where we can try and find that out. So let me take a look at my Windows operating system to help us out here. I'm just going to minimize my internet browser for right now. If I right-click on the Windows Start button, I can go to System. At least I believe this is where we can find. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, so it should be in here. There it is. I was trying to make sure I found the right place. Underneath our device specifications, so I right-clicked and went to the word System. And then on here on the lower right-hand corner of that screen, I was able to see device specifications. And if I take a look at system type, this is what I'm looking for, where it tells me the 64-bit operating system and also this x64-based processor. So that lines up with the operating system running on that 64-bit processor. So usually that's the compatibility option that we have. But like I said earlier, Don, too, that these also normally allow us to run the 32-bit even if I don't have a 32-bit operating system and the processor.
So on the Windows side, if I don't know, if I have doubt, I can always just go with a 32-bit binary and it'll run even on a 64-bit machine. Now, if you're wondering what that difference is, it really boils down to memory access, and very few applications are actually affected by this. That if an application needs to access more than 4 gigabytes of memory, it needs to be a 64-bit application. Well, very few applications actually access that much memory. So you're normally safe going with a 32-bit. And there's a lot of software out there that's only available 32-bit. Now, in this case, I've got that choice, right? I want 7-zip. I know it runs on Windows. I can pick 32 and 64-bit. What if we're running Mac OS, though? Yeah. I don't see that choice here. So what do we do for other operating systems?
Yeah, for the other operating systems, we want to make sure that we go in there and do the same thing, where we check it out and see if we have that download option and capability to do so as well. So on that one, I'm probably not going to be able to run something like this if I don't see a support for that operating system. But if I were to choose something else, we've been using Sublime Text here. This one will also help me out because we've already gone to a Sublime Text. Notice that it does give me the option on the OS X here, so I can actually download that one. Now, for us to check that out on the Mac system, let me see if I can get to my system over here. I can go up to, this is kind of zoom, let me see if I can get to the About This OS, About This Mac. And
on Apple, they did it a little bit different than Microsoft. Microsoft gives you the choice between 32 and 64-bit. Several years ago, Apple just made the decision and said, we're going all 64-bit. So if you have a Mac that's made in the last 7 years, then it's all 64-bit. So you can run 32 or 64-bit. And actually, the version that Ronnie's running right now, 10.13, is the last version where Apple is going to support 32-bit applications at all. So starting with 10.14, it's going to be all 64-bit. That's a big jump for people. So it shows, though, how different vendors are handling things different ways. Same thing is going on in the Linux world, where they're slowly killing off 32-bit. Microsoft always worries about compatibility. They want businesses to be able to run as much software as possible, so they'll hold on to support for 32-bit longer than some of the other vendors. This is not a new thing, right? Because we had 16-bit applications, and Ronnie, you probably remember when Microsoft killed off 16-bit. That was a big deal for a lot of people. 32-bit is going that way now. 64-bit is kind of the way of the future. So with Mac OS, we don't necessarily see a big call out for which architecture we're on because it is 64-bit.
And this also means that the programmers that are designing the software for it, they're probably also programming in the 64-bit already. So you're not having to bring that over, an older version over if you needed to. And since that is going away in the newer editions of this, you'll probably make sure that you also check that out as well. So it gives us that opportunity then to make sure that we choose the right one based on what we need here. Now, this is actually neat because once we get into that idea of that single operating system, there are some like this one, and Don picked a very good software to start us off with here, which is, of course, the Sublime Text that says, look, I'll support every operating system that's out there for us. And now you see where it actually goes from the idea of Linux ones, 32 and 64-bit as well, Windows 64-bit, just Windows, and even the Mac OS. They haven't changed the naming of this one yet, but this one can actually run on all different ones here. Now, Don, each one of these is actually a little bit different, so it's not the one file that just says, I'm a magic file I can run on each of the operating system. They've actually designed it to work with each of the operating systems.
Yeah, and for me, my story on this one lines up exactly what you were saying. Is back at I used to be just an avid Windows user, and there was a program on Windows called Notepad++, and I loved it. I use it. I know you
Right.
used it too, Ronnie. It was a great program, but it only runs on Windows. And so whenever I was on a Linux machine or on a Mac, I had to use something different. It was frustrating to have a different experience on different machines. So I specifically did research and found Sublime Text because it would run on multiple OSs. So now I can sit down on. I have each OS. I run all of them every day.
Right.
So I can go to my Mac, I can go to my Linux box, I can go to my Windows machine, and I can use Sublime Text on all three, and it looks and works the same. That makes me more productive, right? That's not important to everybody though. If you have all Windows machines, what do you care if it's multi-platform or not, right? As long as it works on Windows and that's all you have, then you're good to go. So everybody has their own use case, and that's something that we have to take into account when we're going in and looking for software like this, and making sure that it works not just with our platform, but with the specific version of our platform, right? Operating system compatibility is a big challenge for some programs too, right, Ronnie?
Yeah, this is something that is hard because it's neat when you find a program and go, man, I wish that they made a version of this for Mac OS. Well, sometimes you can find something that says, yes, this is actually that version for Mac OS to work if it was working in Windows. But Don, you and I have run these before, and it is like, yes, the name is right, but it doesn't seem to actually do everything that the original version does. So you can also end up with what we call ported software, which is somebody taking that original version and saying, look, I'm going to rewrite the code to try and make it work in this version of the operating system. And this is where it gets challenging as well, too, because with the ported software, it's strange how even it may be the same language, it running in one operating system versus another operating system, it might not work as well. So sometimes I'm going to come back to the Winzip, and I chose this because I saw this option here for us. And you'll see where it actually does give us something down. I thought I saw it.
It's down towards the bottom of the
Oh,
page.
is it? Okay. Yeah, I saw where it said a ported version of something down here. Oh, well, let me see.
Yeah, so 7-Zip is open source. They release the code, and they let people basically get in there and try and compile it for other OSs. So they have unofficial versions of 7-Zip that run on Linux and some other operating systems that are out there. And so that's kind of a neat thing you see with a lot of open source software. There it is, right there, the Linux port.
Yeah. So this port idea, it is neat, if it works very well and does what it needs to. Now, I haven't tried this one in particular. Don, have you tried this one as far as the port goes?
I have, and it works all right, but it's kind of like you said, that all the features are there, but it's not as stable. It's a little slower than what you'd expect. So ported software is software that was designed to run on one operating system, and now they've just kind of hacked it to make it work on another OS. Native software is software that was written specifically for an OS. And native software is almost always faster and more stable because it was designed for that OS. We're actually starting to see a lot of software that's written for like an iPad that then gets ported over to run on Windows. And it's usually not a very good experience. It's rough. So ported software should be like a last resort option. If I can find native software that does what I want, that's going to be the better choice. Doing ported or emulated or even virtualized software is not going to be the same user experience, and it'll usually lead to instability and other challenges.
Now, Don, with this idea of us just at least hitting the basics here where we can see, those are kind of the general considerations that we want to understand, that not every single application that you're going to want to run is going to run exactly on every operating system you want to run as well. So make sure you check that out and verify that those requirements are met. And if they are, you should be able to run it and should be fine. But if not, and you see the ported option, yes, you can run it, but don't expect it to fully do everything that you want to do, or like what Don was talking about, the performance issues may actually kind of hinder you more than you realize too. So that is at least the most basic of the requirement usages that we have to think about as we take a look at applications here too.
All right, now, Ronnie, I mentioned how 7-Zip is open source, right? So they actually provide you the source code if you want it. It's free. You can come here and you can download it. I know a lot of software is paid. I've got to actually go and purchase it. So how does all of that work? How is free software different than pay software, and where does that factor in?
So sometimes, of course, the big thing with free software is that it's free, which is nice, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's totally 100% free, depending on what we call licensing that may be out there. Now, if you own the software itself, in other words, if you're a company and you develop that software, you can say, hey, here's the way you're going to actually use it, and here's how much we're going to charge you. Here's everything else that you can use it for. Here's what you can't use it for. You name it, it can do that. But you can also, of course, then go to what we were talking about here, which is says free software with open source, and it shows us these different licensing options. Now, there are plenty of different open source types of licensing options that are out there. We're not going to go over all of them because they can actually be fairly complex in what you need, but they're context specific is what ends up happening. So depending on your need, they'll normally define it. So for example, on this one, it just tells you most of the code is under GNU-LGPL. Some part of the code is under this license, and there's some other things, and it shows you right here. You can use 7-zip, and I like this because it actually defines exactly what you can do with it without having to read through a ton. On any computer, including a computer in commercial organizations, you don't need to register or pay for 7-zip. So this is a fairly broad licensing option that we have that says you're not going to pay for it. There's no need to register this back with us at all. But you do have other ones, though, that will say, if you're going to use this and you're going to build a product off of it, well, you have to make sure that the way that you got it is going to be available to somebody else that's going to get your product too. So you're not going to make money off of it in that way. You're actually going to have to provide something else to do that. So there are what we call these licensings that are actually open source in that way. But if you're proprietary, it means you own all the rights to it, and you define what those are actually going to be. And you don't get access to any of the source code. You don't, everything's closed off. The only thing you're actually paying for is essentially usage at that point when you do so. Now, even though those are kind of the basic and primary options, remember that organizations are different from individuals too that are also purchasing the software. You may actually see that if you have an organization and everybody in your organization needs the license, well, I may pay $10 for some license that I download, but what if I had 70 users or 100 users and stuff like that? Well, I may have to instead consider what the producer of that software says is a group or a site license. Then they're saying, look, you're doing a lot, but yeah, you're going to get charged at this other rate instead, and you may have to do that legally in the way that they've actually said something like that, or set it up to make sure that it ends up working. Now, there's varieties of this as well, right? Where it might be where you got, you get 10 licenses, but you can only have a concurrent nature here. In other words, a few of them can, be used at one time. So the idea of concurrent licensing says, look, here's what it's going to be. The very fact is, only this many can be used at one single time, at the very same time. So you may actually have to be able to do something like that as well, okay? Those are possible. I have not actually done this one, though, Don. There is a single-use license, which says, all right, you're going to pay for it, but just for this one time, this one opportunity to use this software. Now, Don, have you actually done anything like that where you paid for that software to only use one time?
Absolutely, yeah. So sometimes where you need something like conversion software, right? I know I used one where I had a bunch of email that was in one system, or was it email or was it a database? It was something where I had data in one system, and I wanted to translate and migrate that data into a different system, right? Not something I do every day. It was part of an upgrade, a migration service. And so you would license it to use it for that one migration. And technically, when you're done with it, you don't need it anymore, right? So why keep paying for the software or have some perpetual license for software that you really just need one time? And so you can use it, you migrate it over, and that's it. That's the video rental model. If you think about it, if I do Redbox, right? I pay $1 to rent a DVD, and I watch the movie. I just rented one. Well, it's not technically one use. I guess you could watch the movie over and over again for 24 hours, but you watch the movie one time and then you put it back, right? I just paid for a one-time use of that video. And that works for some software as well, but not every software, right? Because a lot of software we do intend to use over and over and over again. So most of them, instead of doing it based on a single usage, will be based on like a time window. That maybe you license the software for just one day, or for 1 month, or for 1 year. That's a much more common model. But there are scenarios where it comes down to one use, and it just depends on the type of software. It's a lot of variety.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this can be overwhelming for some people as they first get started, not realizing why they have the usage that they do, why they're allowed to use it in the company, but not outside the company. So it can span on to different other issues that you may have to do. But just overall, take a look at the licensing that's there for you. When you download a piece of software and it says it's freeware or it's shareware, I think is kind of the big one. Or it's shareware, you don't have to pay for it, but sometimes they're time bombed. In other words, they only work for a certain period of time, or they'll go into a mode that you can't have all the functionality back that you had. Like, yeah, let's use this for a little bit of time, but then they kind of just disable it too.
You know, the one that gets me, because all this licensing stuff is up to the developer. Right. They can make whatever license they want. There's not like, here's these 3 license types that you can pick from, and that's it. There are hundreds, thousands probably of different license types that are out there. So you might have somewhere you purchase the software, but you don't get all the features. There's certain features you have to pay extra for. Or the one that always gets me is where you get free upgrades for that minor version. So if it's 2.1, you get 2.2 for free, but you don't get 3.0. Right now, you've got to relicense. So that's why it's so important to read these. You know, the end user license agreements that people just click agree on and go into the software and never actually read? Those usually define the terms of the software. And it is important in a business world to be making sure that we read those. A lot of people don't, though, right? And it's kind of become this joke that when you have a 80-page end user license agreement, who's going to read that? But for businesses, they have to. Licensing like this is really important because it governs, 1, how we pay for the software and use it, and 2, what we can do with the software. If we create something else using that software, we need to make sure that we hold the rights to it and that it's not, something that's being owned by somebody else. That's a tricky thing, especially when it comes to cloud services.
Yeah, Don, we also need to talk about the idea of some of the way that this cost can bear out. It's different today than it once was. The very fact is, Don, you and I, we used to go to the store, a brick and mortar store, buy software in a box, and we took it home and it was ours. That's what we thought.
You'd go into Best Buy and you'd see 5 aisles of software. I mean, just games and productivity and all that, just aisle after aisle. You go in there today and it's like 1 aisle full of TurboTax.
Yeah, that's pretty much TurboTax and its competitors, and you're just reading them like they all do the same thing. So that's what happens. But we need to talk about this idea of the cost, because this has changed over the model of what people want and need anymore today as well. Can you still purchase software that way? Yes. Okay. There is that where you can purchase software, but the idea of having them in boxes probably does limit itself to tax software now, is what it limits itself to. Most of the time, the software that I end up purchasing, and probably I'm assuming Don does too, you're downloading it from the online. And of course, you filled out the form and you paid with your credit card, and you download that, and you're saying, all right, that's mine. That is now mine. And you get that version. You may get some of the, like what you're talking about, the minor version things that end up having to fix some of the things that went wrong, or at least keep you up to date with things. But now a new version comes out, and they're like, oh yeah, you have to pay again is what you have to do, because this is another version. It's not the same software once again. So you may have to pay for something like that. And an example of this is something like if you were to go out and buy like the Office 2016 suite or Microsoft Word or whatever edition that it may be, you go and you buy that, and you'll pay whatever fee that you pay, and you get to install that on your computer and use it according to the licensing agreement. Well, that's yours. But now when 2019 comes out, guess what? You're going to pay again. And that's another thing that we have to actually think about, is that idea, that cost that comes along with doing something like this.
Well, and subscriptions are changing a lot of this too, Ronnie, because I remember like when I was in college, I bought Microsoft Office version 4, right? They weren't doing years then, it was still version number, so I bought version 4. And new versions kept coming out, so eventually like Office 2000 was out, and I was still running Office version 4 because I didn't care. As I'm writing a letter, I can write a letter in whatever version. And I could continue using, actually, I could use it today if I could find my old disks and install it. That copy that I bought of Microsoft Office version 4, that was my copy. And that license is still valid to this day if I could find my disks. But now we're seeing software move to a subscription model where I don't get that software my entire life, that as long as I continue to pay, I continue to get access to that. And that's changed things a lot as well, right, Ronnie?
It has changed things tremendously because of what the subscription model does for us in terms of the payment. But you're essentially paying a fee monthly or yearly or whatever it is that's going to continue to update. But the neat thing about this is that if we do the old model, Don had to wait for that new version to get new features. So whatever it was that he heard about was like, I can't wait till that new version comes out. And then he gets a new version like, that was okay, but not the greatest thing in the world. But now with these subscription features, what they end up doing is they just roll them out. They just constantly roll them out. So you get the latest features that you normally get, and you're not doing anything but paying what you're actually paying for. Now, they can get them set differently too. So an example, if you go to Office 365, you can pay for kind of the bare minimum version, which is fine. But now you go, oh, I really needed more than that. You just go and upgrade the subscription price, and you automatically just go ahead and get that next feature, and you're ready to go. And all the upgrades that come along with that, as long as that version's valid, it will continue to roll out for you. So new features, new upgrades, everything is comes in that subscription model, but it is a recurring payment is what ends up happening. So, when you buy something like that, but it is neat because you get access to it instantaneously too.
So there's positive and negatives to all this, right? On a positive side, you're not paying all up front. You're usually paying a smaller amount monthly or annually, so that's nice. You also get the latest versions. That's nice. On a negative side, the moment the subscription ends, you no longer have access to the software. So you have nothing to show for it. It's kind of like, I remember my dad teaching me like the difference between renting and owning a house, right? When you rent a house, you're putting money into it, but the moment you don't renew your lease, all that money is gone. Versus you own a house, you build equity. I guess you don't build equity in software, so maybe that's a bad example. But at the end of the subscription, you just don't necessarily have anything to show for it. But I personally like the model because I'll find that sometimes I only need software for a little while, maybe a few months. And so I can use it for a few months and then stop, and I've paid less than if I had to outright buy that software. So it gives me access to more things. So subscriptions, definitely something we want to be aware of. A lot of products, from email to Office suites to you name it, like the Adobe Creative Suite, they've all switched to the subscription model, and some of them don't even have where you can just outright buy a product anymore. Adobe was one of the early adopters of that, where you can't just outright buy the Adobe products anymore. You have to subscribe. So definitely a changing and an evolving world there. All right, now Ronnie, when we purchase software, sometimes I know we actually, they just have you download the software and that's it. But a lot of times, like I went and purchased some software at Best Buy the other day, and what I got was not a disc anymore, but simply like a code number that you'd punch in to unlock the software. So what are some of the variations of that?
Yeah, for us, that's going to be the idea of a product key or a serial number that they give you. Now, if you're purchasing this online, you'll download it, and normally whoever the developer is or whoever owns that, they'll also send you either a link to download the right one that you have to download, and then along with that, there'll be a generated code that they'll give you too. So Microsoft is really good at this, where they give you that access to the code. So if you're downloading this from just an individual just developer out there, you may see where they'll just send you an email. Here's your code for the license that you've actually bought, and you'll do that. But you can also see it if you bought software on that computer. So let me show you my screen here. And this is a really old one, okay? The newer ones I think are all in color and different ones here. But this one, you end up seeing that normally you'll get a sticker like this on the bottom of the computer, or even on the box if you actually got the box of software, and kind of pull up the little hiding sticker that's on top of it so it doesn't show what the product key is going to be, or it's inside the box itself. So you'll actually be able to type this code in when you install the software, and that will get it up and running. Some of them instead also offer that serial number, which is functioning about the same thing. If you don't have a right serial number that matches their system, it's not going to do that. So for this one, it's for Microsoft. I'm assuming this was for like XP or Vista or something like that. Most of them will have that. They've eliminated all these so that, make it generic so we don't actually see what a real valid code is going to be. But you'll see those things marked on there for us. So for example, like QuickBooks, they don't call it a product key. They call theirs a serial number. And you'll just have to get that serial number, make sure you type it in the way that they want it to. And if it's valid, it will let you in. If it's not, it will not let you in. On these product keys, it just says, yeah, the product key is invalid. And you'll either have to call support or something, and they'll walk you through this, or they'll tell you, no, that key is invalid anymore. You have to purchase another one. So this idea of a product key or a serial number is what helps them to keep track of how many editions are out there or how many copies of this is out there.
Yeah, and that license management is important because, for example, we use on the show a program called Simple Diagrams, right? A little diagram software, and there's 5 of us that use it here, and so I bought a 5-user license. Well, they only sent me one code. It's one code, but back on their server somewhere, they have a tally that says this code can be used 5 times, and so each of us have used it. Ronnie used it, I used it, and if I want to install it on more computers, as soon as I hit 5, now the code becomes invalid. And I can reach out to support and say, hey, I got rid of this one computer. Can I move it to another? And then they kind of fix the numbering for you. But the code has a limited number of usage. Most of the time, those serial numbers can only be used once,
Yes.
right? But like in the case of the sticker that's on that laptop, it was designed to be used
Only.
once on that laptop. But other ones, like our diagramming software, maybe the code gets used more than once. Or with enterprise agreements, you might have codes that are designed to be used hundreds of times, all within inside of one organization. So that's something that we need to make sure we learn about from the vendors when we purchase our software, is how that code is intended to be used. You might get a bunch of codes, you might get a single code, but each one kind of has different requirements that are built around that. Now, Ronnie, when it comes to obtaining software, right, what are some of the best practices around that? Like the things I need to be looking out for, or what the process is for getting that software on my system?
Right. So when you come to get software, the best practice, at least to go and get it, is to make sure you're downloading it from the authorized website or from the one that is the one that you want to buy from. Now, there's a bunch of different sites out there that will say software download, this and that. Can you get it from there? Possibly. But if you're going to be purchasing it, make sure you get it from those sites that it says that you should get it from. And then you, of course, once you do that and you get the proper license, you can install it. But there are some best practices at actually installing the software as well. And this is something we want to talk about at least briefly here when we start doing it. Now, one of the key ones is the idea of just simply reading the instructions when they actually provide you the instructions on what needs to be done. I can't tell you how many times where I've actually run into the issue where I started installing software, Don, and all of a sudden in the middle of the install it says, you're missing this component. Please install this component. And then I go, all right, how do I do that? I click cancel, and it's like rolling back the installation process, and then you have to install it again. So simply just reading what needs to have, be on the computer first. The great thing is most of that software, it normally does a check for you now. Like it says, hey, if these things need to be on the computer, it will go ahead and check before you even start the installation process. So it's a lot better now than what used to end up happening.
That's going to be important, especially if the software is supported on more than one operating system, like with Sublime Text, where it supported Mac OS, it supported Windows, and it supported Linux. The way you install is different on each platform.
Right.
So they usually give you guidance there as how to get it installed as well, correct?
Right, and that's something I wanted to make sure that I mentioned too. So the idea of Sublime Text, installing it on Windows, fairly easy. Okay, you download the downloadable, you double click on it, and in no time it's actually installed. When you go into a Linux system at this point, just briefly here, if I can show you, this may actually be a little bit different here. So let me see if I can pull this up the way that I had it earlier. Trying to get to maybe I didn't pull it up here. Let's see. So let me see there it is, Sublime Text. So I want to show you the instructions that are on here for the Linux edition. So once you get to the Linux repo, I can select this. And now all of a sudden, Don, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. And we were mentioning this in the OS system, the show where we talked about the operating system. Manage your repositories, and then you pick the version. And now, Don, all of a sudden, yes, without these instructions, it becomes a little bit more challenging to get this thing installed the way that they want to. So they even explain why they did it this way. And it's like, we could have packaged this all up, but they said they didn't want to fight the operating system in the way that the operating system wants to install the software. So yes, you'll need to work a little bit more with something like the command line here, or the terminal, to make sure that everything is actually going to install the way that they want it. So following those instructions are very, very important when you deal with something this complex too. Okay, so when we go back over here to the Windows, though, this is where it becomes a little bit tricky, because normally you also get instructions during the install of something as well. Now, one of the things that we normally encounter is what we call an end-user licensing agreement. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. Don, I'd actually tried to do this a couple of times right before the show, and none of these actually had an end-user licensing agreement on them, which was unusual. So I found one on Wireshark, and that's why I picked this one here. So I thought, no, they're all on here. It shows you how long it's been since I've downloaded some of this software. So you have a licensing agreement, and this is what they are expecting you, of course, to read through every single line of this, Don, every single line, okay? And sometimes it won't even let you go to the next step until you at least scrolled all the way down to the bottom, and then you click I agree at this point. So if you don't read through that, you won't know what the actual licensing agreement that you're agreeing to make sure that everything is installed the way that you want to. And then once you click that, and now you have these different components that you can also install. And this may be a little bit more advanced, so you're not exactly sure what you want, or you know exactly what you want to install. Well, you can also pick this and even expand out some of these options, and you'll see that this gives you more advanced options to install if you want to. So there are a lot of different options that are available, but if you don't read through that, you'll notice here again, shortcuts, file extensions, once again, advanced additional tasks that are here for you to make sure that everything's going to install the way that you want to. It's going to put it in program files. And here's another piece of software that says if you want it to run, you've got to install this too. So as we continue to walk through here, it's going to show us all this. But if I just think I'm going to click next, 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 next all the way through it, I may get a product on my, but I'm not sure why certain stuff is on there or what's happening. Make sure you check this out. Read the instructions first, especially if it seems complex, especially in the Linux. If you're not used to that realm, make sure you go ahead and do all the reading that you need to there, and the installation should run relatively smoothly.
And also be careful, because some free software, well, they've got to pay for their product somehow. And so sometimes they'll package advertising software in with their software. And when you go through the install, if you're just clicking next a bunch, you might actually install some of that advertising software. If you read, you'll see where it's going to do it, and you can say no, and then it won't install it. So it's all about just kind of paying attention and being responsible about installing software on your system. All right, well, Ronnie, I think that's a pretty good run through of software usage and some of the things we need to watch out for. Did you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Well, just the idea, right, that be considerate when you actually start to take a look at some of the options that are available. Not everything that says free is always free, so take a look at the licensing options and understand the difference between that subscription and the one-time pay. We've done a pretty good job at making sure that you've gone through that and at least thought about it. But in the reality, when you do support, you actually see a lot of this comes into more play than when you're just sitting at home going, all right, I just want to download this software and work. Most of them will give you a trial version, so try them out at least. But when you get into the workplace environment, you'll see some of this will probably be more pertinent to what you're doing.
All right, well, Ronnie, thank you for walking us through that. And for those of you out there in TV land, we do appreciate you watching. What you've seen is CompTIA IT Fundamentals, software usage, and just getting that kind of nice little overview there of all the different things we need to watch out for when we're downloading software, installing software, and purchasing software. So thank you for all that. But if you've been staying along with us, make sure you stay tuned, because we've got more episodes of CompTIA IT Fundamentals coming up. Signing off for ITProTV, I'm your host, Don Pezet.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
And we will see you next time.
Thank you for watching ITProTV.